Hola, buenos días a todos, bienvenidos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos a esta nueva entrevista con los expertos de talento. En este episodio vamos a estar hablando de una de las muchas preguntas que siempre nos hacen, si la gente puede realmente cambiar. Para ello tenemos dos personas expertas invitadas el día de hoy, Jackie Sham y Ryan Sherman, que nos acompañan de Hogan Assessment Systems. Jackie es la directora global de desarrollo y aprendizaje en Hogan Assessment Systems. Ella supervisa la innovación, el diseño, la entrega y la ejecución de todas las soluciones de desarrollo y aprendizaje de liderazgo a nivel mundial en Hogan. Ryan, que también nos acompaña, él es PhD y es director del Departamento de Ciencia en Hogan Assessment Systems.
Personality is really just all about the nature of human nature. Essentially is a person's characteristic way of doing things, the way they see the world, the unique way they process information, interpret the events going on around them, the way they might approach a work task or project or relationship with someone else. All of that is colored and determined by your underlying personality characteristics. And there are, a few components to personality. A lot of what people think of when they talk about personality is their own identity, their own sort of view of themselves, the way they see themselves, or in many cases, the way they want to be seen or viewed by the world. But what we really care about from the Hogan perspective is your reputation, which is more of the outside in view. So it's about how others are interpreting your behavior, how they perceive you, what kind of characteristics they would assign to you as an observer of that behavior. Personality does come from a mix of what sometimes you will hear referred to as nature and nurture. So nature being the genetics, what you're born with, your heritable traits, and then the nurture part is how you're raised, your upbringing, your values, your culture, how you're parented, the social circles you belong to or that you were influenced by when you were young and as you mature. And they both are at play in the development of personality.
When we talk about personality, we're often talking about sort of four different things all at once. And one she mentioned is identity, another one she mentions is reputation. But there's two other ways that we talk about personality. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of the actual behaviors, the actual things that somebody did. This is particularly relevant in the workplace, right? So you might think about somebody's reputation in the workplace as being important, but also if they're being safe, if they are doing things that are destructive or dangerous. I mean, that's a behavior. It might not be some reputation yet, but it's a behavior that they're engaging in. That's another thing that we care about from a personality standpoint. And the last one is biology, and that's that fourth component. And when we're talking about where does personality come from, we know that that's a big part of it. 50%, that's what most studies suggest, that at least 50% of our personality comes from, or at least accounted for by what we would call twin studies or genetics kinds of studies. It's a very tricky issue because scientists now are trying to identify what are the genes associated with these personality characteristics. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be going very well. So what we do know is from things like twin studies that identical twins are twice as alike as non-identical twins, right? So that suggests that genetics is accounting for 50% of the variability in our reputation or our behavior or even identities, depending on which kinds of studies we're looking at. It seems like parental influence is a lot less than we would like it to be. That there's seems to be a pretty big impact of peer influence, particularly, as your kids are developing their personalities through ages 5, 6, 7. When you start hitting school and going all the way through high school, there's a lot going on from a personality development standpoint. And a lot of that is actually driven by the peer group and trying to basically, like we all did as well, we try to navigate those interpersonal situations. We're trying to figure out which group do I belong to? What do I want to do with my life? What do I want to do with my career? Who are the right people for me? All of those kinds of things help shape who we are. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of parents, that has a much bigger influence than what they want to do at home with their kids.
We're interested, as personality scientists, we're interested in making predictions based on a person's personality, right? So the information that we use in our field is is not very useful if we can't predict the way somebody will behave over time and across situations. We do find that personality is quite stable and becomes more stable as a person ages. So particularly when they're young, they're going through early adulthood maturation processes, there are some kind of funky things that happen with personality, some fluctuations. But when you get to 40, 50, 60, and as you start to age, that personality becomes much more kind of crystallized or stable. And then what I would just add to that is, although it's quite stable over time, there are also some predictable changes that people go through as they mature. So we know that those changes are small in nature, small in magnitude, but they do kind of occur in these predictable patterns.
In terms of those kinds of patterns, for example, we know that people generally become more conscientious, for example, as they get older. The only exception there is teenage years, where people generally decrease in conscientiousness quite a bit. And then it sort of bounces back after that time period. People generally become more extroverted as they get older. People generally become less neurotic as they get older. So there are these sort of general trends. As you said, Jackie, they tend to be pretty small, but again, on average, everybody is sort of moving in this direction of maturation.
Most people want to change at least one aspect of their personality. Most people want to be maybe a little more organized if they're low on conscientiousness, or what we call prudence. People want to be more extroverted when they're introverted, or vice versa. The goal is not to change your personality or try to change who you are, but the goal should be rather to just make small adjustments to your behavior to achieve some sort of end goal. So if the goal is, I'm an extrovert and I need to learn how to listen better and talk less, I might not be able to control that sort of that very innate impulse to contribute or to talk, but I can learn new habits to try to control the way that comes across to other people. So for example, I have a colleague who says she has a rule. She's an extrovert and is high on a scale we call colorful, which means, she likes to talk and likes to be heard. So she has a rule where she lets at least 2 people contribute in a meeting before she will. And then after she contributes, she lets another 2 contribute again, so that she ensures she's not dominating the conversation. Because otherwise, kind of left to her nature, she will be more, one of the louder voices in the room. So she hasn't really changed who she is or that impulse to speak up, but has controlled that perception or that reputational impact that she's having on others, or the interpersonal impact she's having on others, by making a very slight habit-based behavioral shift. And that's really where we see personality change be effective. It's unlikely to make these big dramatic changes in the way you are or the way you're perceived, but small adjustments can really have a meaningful impact on your effectiveness, or you want to become more organized. People can learn those habits.
I think at a deeper level, there's a bigger question there about what is it that you really want to change, usually for some sort of end goal, right? So if you're looking at, hey, I want to be different, or I want to be better in some way to help my career, well, that's the kind of thing where we can really help out with really good assessments and really good feedback. You can learn these are the behaviors that I need to do more, like the example that Jackie gave. You can learn about how that can influence your reputation, have an impact on your career. The last way, and unfortunately a lot of the studies on personality change, if you look around, is that we can change our identity. And again, I think at some level, people that's not really what they want to change. And in some level, that's also trivially easy to change. You can just change the way you want to see yourself. If you want to, right? For example, you can take a personality assessment and then take it again and get different scores if you want to. I mean, it's not that hard to do. I can just answer the questions differently and get different scores. But I think there's a real question there about what has actually changed. Your scores on the test changed, but is that really meaningful? Is that the kind of change you're looking for? Probably not. What you're probably looking for is something more along the lines of what Jackie talked about in terms of reputation and behavioral change.
I think the most important thing is to be really practical about a change and start small. And we know from all of the science around behavioral modification and change, even outside of the personality realm, if we're thinking about behavioral changes related to exercise habits or weight loss or trying to stop smoking or whatever behavior a person is targeting, what we know is that trying to do too much all at once is really ineffective. And what the behavioral sciences teach us is that when you make really small behavioral changes and then build on that success, by practicing a new behavior, getting feedback about that behavior, how it's coming across to other people, and gaining confidence and momentum from those small changes, that's really the way to make it stick. And small changes can lead to bigger changes, which is known as the domino effect in the world of behavior change and modification.
I think the other thing I would add is that it takes that intentional sort of effort. To change what you've practiced your whole life really takes this intentional effort. I think Jackie's right. You want to start with small steps, but then it's got to be this intentional effort, intentional practice, probably every day or every meeting or whenever you're in those circumstances where you're working on that thing, you need to practice it and practice it and practice it until eventually it does become much more natural.
People are often not really aware, number one, of why they do the things that they do, and they're not often aware when they are engaging in a particular behavior that's negative or that's influencing their reputation in a negative way. And it's kind of like a very instinctual, very deeply ingrained response. And sometimes I think about personality characteristics as kind of your handedness. If you're right-handed or left-handed, you could teach yourself how to write, for example, or eat with your non-dominant hand with a lot of effort. It's hard. If you've ever had a broken arm or something and have tried to do this, it's really, really difficult, but it's possible. If you practiced every day and were really disciplined about it, you could do that. But in a moment of stress, so say, for example, I threw a baseball at Ryan and said, think fast, catch the ball. He would probably reach up with his dominant hand, even if he had practiced for years and years, to become proficient with his left hand. And that's often how people are when they're faced with, everyday life in these situations that evoke a particular behavior or personality related, behavior. They are responding in these kind of very instinctual, hardwired ways that can be really hard to control in any kind of meaningful way. I think we would view coachability much like we would evaluate most other kind of personality characteristics, in the sense that I do think it's normally distributed. So some people are highly coachable. They're very receptive to feedback. In fact, they may even tend to be just more self-critical, self-aware, self-reflective by nature, more likely to do what we call introspection, which is thinking about why you do the things you do or why you are the way you are. And some people are not very coachable. They're arrogant, or they are resistant to feedback. They tend to dismiss or brush off or otherwise ignore negative feedback messages. So I certainly, in my personal experience working with leaders, some people are extremely difficult to coach and extremely resistant to feedback. So I do think to some extent it exists on a continuum. But I do think there is potential for all people to be coached and to develop. And in a lot of cases, I think it's about finding that motivational hook, or what is it that will propel this person to make some sort of change. Because motivation is a really important part, but I think you have to find that thing, that motivational force that will make a person want to do the hard work that we know is required to make meaningful change.
We are sort of hardwired to protect our own egos or our own self-esteem, if we want to say it that way, right? We want to think of ourselves as good, as valued individuals, and getting feedback that you've done something bad or wrong or offensive or inappropriate or harmful doesn't feel good. And so we have a tendency to reject that information because we want to protect ourselves. We want to make ourselves feel good about ourselves. And some people are better at that than others, as Jackie mentioned, but some people really they build up lots of walls and lots of defensives that protect them from that kind of information. They get bad or negative information about themselves. They reject it. When we're coaching or when we're giving people feedback, it's important to let them know that they're valued, even if they're not perfect, right? And so if you feel that you're valued, but you can do better, then people, I feel like, are more motivated to say, okay, yes, I can listen to this feedback, I can handle this feedback, and I can use it going forward. But if somehow they're not feeling valued, if they feel like, oh no, my value is going down, then they're much more likely to reject that feedback.
It's very tempting to try to look for evidence of change, that successful change has occurred, looking for that evidence in a personality test result, and to say, well, I wanted to be more conscientious. Was I able to increase my scores on conscientiousness? And that's really not the best place to look for the evidence of that change. Because again, kind of going back to what Ryan was saying earlier, we talked about earlier about, we're really not looking to change the personality, the underlying kind of structure of your person, but we're trying to change the way it comes across to other people by making these little changes. So the best place to look for that evidence is in a 360 or other multi-rater tool, or really just any kind of feedback you can get from other people, even if it is just verbal or anecdotal or written. It's not so important, what are the exact combination of personality characteristics or behaviors. Victoria, to your point, there's no such thing as a perfect person or a perfect leader or an ideal personality profile. We all have strengths and challenges, no matter what kind of scores we obtain on a personality test. So for leaders, I think we can also look for evidence of that change in the team. So is the team more effective? Are they healthier? Are they more, not from a medical standpoint, but from a productivity and cohesion and morale standpoint, are they producing higher quality outputs? Are they engaged? Do they feel good about the work and the team? So I think when we're searching for evidence of that change, we can look in some of those other external sources. Personality is quite stable over time. It can be changed, but the nature of those changes are kind of small in magnitude. And in fact, for them to be successful, for change to be successful, it is best to start with really small, really practical changes that are goal-directed, that are oriented towards something you want to achieve, some reputational change or some objective, so that you have kind of a destination for that development journey. People want to change, they want to grow, whether we're talking about therapy in clinical settings or use of assessment in the workplace or any other application. We know that development works better when you use an assessment as part of that process. Having that sort of objective set of data points that help to shed light on a person's strengths and challenges, or things they might need to work on. When we're giving feedback, whether it's from a 360 or a personality assessment tool or just in everyday life, I think sometimes we underestimate how emotional that can be for people. And to really help manage that, and Ryan, you gave a great suggestion about how to best do that, in making people feel really appreciated and valued, but also normalizing that everybody has flaws. Everybody has potential derailers or challenges, that no matter where your strengths are or challenges are, that you're not alone in this, right? So I think taking care that we are managing the emotional process people may be going through when they're receiving feedback and thinking about what they might want to change, I think is a great way to support them in that change effort.
Negative feedback is a real opportunity and a real empowering moment for you to develop your career.
One of the things that makes Hogan most unique, I would say two things. One is our focus on measuring reputation. So we are very much concerned with what your scores predict in the real world. So predicting outcomes like performance, like interpersonal skills and other kind of EQ, emotional intelligence related soft skills or behaviors. The focus on prediction and having the scientific evidence and research to back up the claims that we make about personality. So when you read a Hogan report and it says people who score as you did tend to be described by others as, this, that, and the other, that's because we have the evidence to prove that is the statistical likely reputation for that person. And the other thing I would say that makes Hogan really unique is we have a measure called the Hogan Development Survey, which is measuring the dark side of personality. And it's a really unique instrument. There really just isn't anything out there quite like it. And it measures our likely reactions to things like stress, pressure, even things like boredom or complacency, really any situation in which we're letting our guard down or not self-monitoring very closely.
I have a dozen people who work on my team who are highly well educated, well trained, and well paid. Many other companies don't do that. They don't invest in the science. We revise our measures all of the time. We have more than 400 criterion-related validity studies in our archive, which is the most of anybody. We do millions of assessments all over the world. We're translated into nearly 50 languages, and we have people and distributors in almost 60 countries, because we take that part of it really seriously. Lots of other places don't. For us, that scientific evidence is the most critical part of what we do. We want to make sure that what we say is as accurate as it can possibly be, and I think that's our real value proposition.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, the participants, Vicky, and everyone, and have a really nice day.